So for my Learn Together week 8 code, um, I've actually done a little bit of change to it just today. And actually, this is a current video. I realized today that I hadn't actually recorded one from a prior semester. So this is great. It lets me kind of look at the code again myself and give you a run through of what I did. So one of the first things I did is I noticed on the one I did last semester, because I wrote code, I just didn't do a video, is that I did have it to where it didn't do the minimal validation. And validation is a big deal. I talk about it next week more, but it's never too soon to get introduced to the topic. And so in this case, just by adding the required attribute, and so anytime you have an input, now that's for a select, but the same would be true, right, for any of your inputs, the name, right? Any of these that you put required on, typically we think of them as inputs because select is a type of input, right? So if you put like for these, right, now I wouldn't put required because it's a check box one or the other, so you can assume it's not. Again, a little more next week, but I just wanted to say, right, if I don't enter a name, but here's the idea is that you're getting the user input. Now, this is, of course, more fields than you have to do for this assignment, okay? But I tell you to make this as, I believe, beneficial to you is really think about what is the minimum number of inputs you would need from the user for your decision code to run. So I have an input text box, I have a drop down, I have a check box, and I have another drop down. And that's what I felt like I needed. Now, when this code first runs, there's no data to render. Okay. So if I go up here and I give it my name and I keep these defaults and I say I'm driving and it's Monday, then it renders the output. And here's the key, right? If I do it again, right? And I say, okay, it's 7 o'clock. Gym is at 8. I am driving and I had an unexpected event and it's Tuesday. Then I would want it to render not only, all right, the Monday one, but also the Tuesday one. And so what you're doing basically is you're gathering the user input, you're creating the output, and you're also rendering the saved output, right, to the screen. Okay. So let me just dive into the code for a second. And I'm also clearing the form, by the way, and which is good, like, practice is to actually clear forms once you do that. And we'll learn different ways to do it, and I can show you how I did it. A kind of a, I would almost say it's a lazy way. But in this case, right, the one thing I did is I set up that global daily array so I could push in objects into it. Most of my decision code was untouched at this point because it's basically the same. I did have a form event listener, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I had a render function. Okay, so now this render function gets called out on the global space. And in this case, like if I just set my breakpoint here, because we're going to learn also very soon about how to save the data to local storage. But for right now, because it is volatile data, meaning if I refresh the page, it goes away, right? Then when I run my render function and I step into it, right, and I'm passing daily, right, then I'm going to clear, and this is where you can clear the output here if there was from there before. Okay, and if I was running multiple inputs, I would have some there before. And then what I did is I just said if my daily dot length, because it's an array, is not equal to 0, right, meaning I have something in there, then run this, else just run this code that says on the else block, then render something into the screen saying there's nothing there, and then we stop. Okay. Now, to actually have a breakpoint that shows it running, I would need to come up here, set a breakpoint, let my dev tools go ahead and refresh. And then in here, I've already rendered to the page. I have my form, which, by the way, I know he showed it using not necessarily a form, but using forms going forward is a really good practice. I highly recommend it. For this first one, I'm not going to get so crazy. I just want you to know. So to make it easier, right, I just grab those form values, each of those form values that I had, and then I set up Oh, now look at this. See, it's interesting when you read your own code, you realize you make mistakes. Just like everybody, we make mistakes. What I did wrong here is I didn't do this. Right? Now you could argue, right, with me if we should do that, or can we do cons? And because we're not changing them, we could totally do cons. But as I was reading my own code, I was like, oh, that's totally wrong. Ah, totally wrong. It's just you need to declare them. So anyway, I set up these values that pointed to the form, which I have just if you go down here, the form points to the form itself, right? So that you can see, not the form data, just the form itself. So that is here, right? And then you set up a new object. Again, I need to declare that. I'm not sure why I kept doing that. My bad. And now what I do is I set up that new object, right? And then I process that object. So that's actually probably the part you want to see more than anything, right? Is how you process the object. Now, this is not really any different than what he showed on the to-dos, right? So now I'm going to step through. I'm going to step, creating these different variables, block scoped by pointing to those values. Okay. Then I set up the object and then I process daily, which is functionality I already had. Right. And then here's where we're just going through and then doing the calculation, which is nothing new. So I don't feel like I have to go over this stuff. And then I said my decision object. Again, nothing new here. Right. I'm returning that decision object, right, that I got up here, which again, I did not declare, my bad. And then I pushed, now here's the key, is I pushed in the daily that decision object. Okay, I didn't push that whole object I had from the user input. I just did the decision, which made the day and the list of items and then a message that I created. Okay, so I did that in my function here. So I go ahead and push that. And then I call render again. And that's a nice thing, right? Is you can call render from out here on the global space, but you can also call render right inside of one of your functions once you have all the data you need to present back to the user. So then I'm going to call, and I'm just going to jump over this. Okay, so I'm going to step over this because we don't need to see it. We've already seen what that does. And now this time it did the second or the first if block where it actually iterated over that array of objects to show that output. Okay, so that's definitely part of what I want to see is multiple. I want to see your global array of objects from the user input. You get to decide what you save and what you don't. As you saw, I used two objects here. One object was just to process the data, and the other object was from the decision itself. Anyway, I hope this helps, and I'll talk to you later.